The second thing that I would like to address is the relationship between the Holocaust and genocide. You see, this is 60 years, a round figure, after the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, ratified in 1951, ratified by the United States in 1988, if you don't mind. By now, the majority of the countries in the world have ratified it. It has never been applied, because what it says there in the convention is that if somebody recognizes something to be a genocide, they should turn to the Security Council. Well, good luck. In the case of Darfur, the United States turned to the Security Council. It was never applied. The definition of genocide by the convention is very important. It creates an international legal document, although it has never been used. But it creates a threat for the perpetrators. It creates the possibility of action in the future. It is not a document that was formulated by academics, although it was initiated by an academic, a Polish Jewish refugee lawyer in New York by the name of Raphael Lemkin. It was he who pushed for it. But what was adopted was something slightly different. It was a horse trading document between the West and the East. And it has so many pitfalls and loose ends and loopholes that you could drive a bus through it. And so, I don't know of a single academic in the world, and I deal with these issues, that will agree with the definition of the convention. But I also don't know any two academics who will agree on any alternative. And so, that's what we are stuck with. But you see, the definitions of these things are abstractions from realities. And the realities are always much more difficult, much more complicated than our definitions are. And what we then do when we have these social and political definitions, we try to press the reality into the definition instead of trying to change the definition to fit the reality. And so what I'm dealing with here is not the definition of the convention, but genocide, which means, in fact, the annihilation of groups of humans. Groups you can define whether they are political or religious or ethnic or racial or national or political. And so what we have to deal with is the propensity of human beings. We are, who are we? We are territorial predator mammals. That's what we are. We live by hunting. Today we go to the super to buy meat. But it's hunting. We eat meat. We eat fish. We are hunters. We are killers. By instinct. By necessity. Now, this is what we have to contend with. Fortunately, there is the opposite instinct in us as well, because we are weak predators. None of you, fortunately, has the teeth of tigers or the claws of bears. And so we need collaboration, cooperation. That developed in a human society the feeling for friendship, for love, for self-sacrifice for others. That is there too. And the Holocaust is such a terrific example, because on the thin margins of the mass murder, there were non-Jews who saved Jews. There were Jews who saved Jews. And believe it or not, there were Jews who saved non-Jews in the Holocaust. Now, what is the parallel between the Holocaust and other genocides? Primarily the suffering of the victims. It is always the same. There is no difference between a Jew and the Tutsi and the Gypsy and the Russian and the German and the Pole and the Chinese and anyone else in the world who is undergoing that kind of an experience of mass murder and mass killing and mass extermination. There's no better genocide than another genocide. There's no better mass killing of children than other killing of children. There's no better rape than another rape. There's no better torture than another torture. The suffering of the victims is always the same. The way that these genocidal mass murders are committed always uses the best possible means in the hands of the perpetrators. The Germans had gas, so they used it. The Hutus didn't have any gas, so they didn't use it. They used other means. Always the ones that are best suited to the situation. That's another parallel. There are some other parallels. What are the differences? You see, in my view, and I challenge anyone to contradict that, there is no genocide, and genocides have been with humanity from time immemorial and before that. There is no genocidal event where there are elements that are not repeated in yet other genocides. Always you can find parallels between any genocide you take and other genocides. But in the genocide of the Jews, which we improperly and incorrectly call the Holocaust, there are elements that are not repeated in any other genocide so far. So far. But humanity is developing, and what happened in the past can be repeated in the future. Because the Holocaust didn't happen because the intervention of some god or some Satan. It's a human perpetration of a crime. And anything that humans do can be repeated. Not in exactly the same way, of course, but in approximately similar ways. And so the Holocaust is not unique. Uniqueness would mean that it cannot be repeated. But it can be repeated. So it's not unique. It's unprecedented, which means that it's a precedent, or could be a precedent. But it shouldn't be a precedent. It should be a warning. That's why you are here today. Now, what are the elements that are unprecedented in the genocide of the Jews? There are many. But I would say pick out 5. Totality. National Socialist Germany and its allies and collaborators tried to find every single person they defined as being Jewish. They defined as being Jewish. Identify that person, mark that person, register, humiliate, dispossess, concentrate, transport, and kill. Every single individual they could lay their hands on. Every single person who was descended from 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was sentenced to die for the crime of having been born. That is unprecedented in human history. It was supposed to happen everywhere in the world. There are many documents to prove that. But one where we have a stenographic record of a meeting on the 28th of November 1941 between Hitler and the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, a Nazi collaborator who was living in Berlin. And because Husseini didn't know German and Hitler didn't know Arabic, there was a translator who took down stenographic notes. We have them. And Hitler said explicitly that, okay, the Middle East, don't worry. We'll deal with the Jews there like we'll deal with them here once we conquer it. But when we win the war, Hitler says, we shall turn to the countries of the world and ask of them to deal with the Jews the way we are dealing with them in this continent. This was for the first time in human history a globally, universally conceived genocide. Third element is ideology. Every genocidal event is accompanied by an ideology that rationalizes the event, obviously. But in the case of in all the other cases, it has a pragmatic element in it, a pragmatic sense. Political, economic, military, whatever. There are practical things that people want to achieve by killing other people. Practical aims. With the murder of the Jews, there was no practical aim at all. None at all. The Jews were not killed because of their property. The property was taken away from them as a result of their being killed. You see, there is this legend again. Property. No! Yes, they took away the property, of course. Why not? You're going to kill them. What were the reasons for their killing? Nightmares. This small group of people want to control the world. That's what the Nazis said. Jewish world conspiracy, an ancient idea. It was a mirror image of what the Nazis wanted to do. They wanted to control the world. The Jews are murdering non-Jewish children for their special foods, the matzot, the Passover bread and Passover, other things like that. The Jews are corrupting culture. These are constructs, ideological constructs. There was no real relation between that and the real Jews and the real situation. It was a non-pragmatic ideology. Łódź in Polish was the second largest ghetto in Poland. It was the last ghetto that survived in Poland in 1944. It was kept alive because it was producing close to 9% of all the uniforms of the Wehrmacht. So the army wanted to keep it going, and the local Nazis wanted to keep it going because they were getting bribes and they were squeezing out money from the ghetto. They were living very well there. And if the ghetto was destroyed, they would be sent to the Eastern Front. They were all young men. From a practical point of view, from a pragmatic point of view, this was marvelous for the Germans. But then came an order from Himmler directly. In early 1944, no economic considerations, Jews must be killed. Is that capitalistic, cost-effective, pragmatic? Nonsense. A non-pragmatic ideology, a nightmare. And for that nightmare, they murdered millions of people. For the first time in human history, a genocidal event happens, not because of real reasons, pragmatic reasons, but because of nightmarish ideas. Fourthly, the race, a new concept. There are no races, my friends. We all come from East Africa about 500,000 years ago. That's been proved by DNA probes. There are no races. There's only one human race. But there's racism, yes, of course, a construct. And the Nazis wanted to create a new world hierarchy with the Nordic peoples of the Aryan race. The Nordic peoples didn't like the Nazis, but that was quite irrelevant. Nordic peoples of the Aryan race at the top and everybody else below them in a hierarchy, no Jews, because there wouldn't be any Jews anymore. But the Jews were the Satan, the anti-God, with the Nordic peoples of the Aryan race as the God, the godly people, the Jews as the satanic people. This contradiction there you can find in the big meetings of the Nazi party in Nuremberg in the 1930s, where you have huge numbers of people in a large area, at night always, with projectors over them, light projectors creating Gothic arches. They are in a cathedral. And there's an altar. Well, it's actually a speaker's platform. It looks like an altar. And behind that there is a cross. Well, it's a swastika, but it looks like a cross. Well, more or less. And then comes the Messiah, the Savior himself, to talk to the people. God himself. When you have a God, you have to have a Satan, right? There was a Satan. And that is the fourth element. This unprecedented idea of a new revolution. Communism has been there before. In the French Revolution, one class instead of another. In the original communist idea, the proletariat instead of the bourgeoisie. That's been there before. But race, a construct, never. And the fifth is that the Nazis wanted to destroy what we inaccurately, again, know as Western civilization. And the Jews are the last remnant of the origins of that civilization, because the Greeks, the ancient Greeks are no more, the ancient Romans are no more. People who live there speak different languages, pray to different gods, create different types of literature. But the Jews are still there, well, not biologically maybe, but culturally. It's a continuum. The Jews are not a race biology. You go out here into the next town, you'll see black Jews and white Jews and brown Jews, and if there were green and blue people in the world, you would have green and blue Jews too. But they are a culture, a civilization, with a tremendous past and present. And my grandchildren read stuff that was written 3,000 years ago without a dictionary. You know, you try that. If you come from English-speaking countries, you try that with Chaucer, but you won't get very far. If you come from French-speaking areas, try that with the troubadours. If you come from German-speaking areas, Walter von der Vogelweide, and so on and so forth. But this is a continuation, and the Nazis were aware of that. This is conscious, not only with Hitler, but with the hundreds of professors, Nazi professors at German universities. That this is a symbol. The Jews are the symbol of the civilization that we want to destroy. It's quite actually logical, you know, that the Jews were chosen as a symbol. These are unprecedented elements. There are more. Again, it can be a precedent. It's not unique, it's unprecedented. That's why there's a connection between this Jewish specificity of the Holocaust and the universal meaning of the Holocaust. It's universal because it's specific. It's specific because it's universal. There's two sides of the same coin. When in 2005, 2006, January 2006, I was honored to be the first speaker at the General Assembly of the United Nations on Holocaust Memorial Day. I thought that Darfur could be solved. I'm no longer sure. It's up to us. Is there a connection between that and the Holocaust? You bet. The Holocaust is the most extreme form of a sickness that affects all of us. And because it's the most extreme case, we have to start from that. We can't deal with everything, which doesn't mean to say we shouldn't deal with the other things, or quite the contrary. You start with a paradigm, with a paradigmatic genocide, and then you deal with others if you can. Can we deal with it? I'm not sure. But we are not obliged to succeed. We are obliged to try. And that is the message of the decision of the United Nations of November 2005 that established this date. You know, 27th of January, this is symbolic. 27th of January was the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army. It didn't stop the genocide. It carried on for another 3.5 months. There were hundreds of thousands, I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of thousands of Jews and others who were killed between 27th of January and 8th of May 1945. It's symbolic because the Holocaust was not the last genocide. Like the liberation of Auschwitz, there was a continuation. So from the Holocaust, there's a continuation. Will there be an 8th of May for all of humanity? I can only hope.